All right, folks, how we all doing here this morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you happen to be out in the world? Very, very happy to have you joining us here today. My name is Kevin Whinnery, and I have the pleasure of leading the developer experience team here at Retool. And today we're very excited to share a little bit about how Retool uses Retool to kind of streamline some critical sales operations in our own work day to day. So Retool, as you might imagine, is a huge user of Retool. We use Retool applications to kind of make each part of our days a little bit faster, a little bit easier. And in fact, Retool probably uses thousands, perhaps, different individual Retool applications every day across every single function of the company. But today we're actually going to dive a little bit deeper into one particular area, which is on the sales side of things, where we use Retool applications to streamline some of our revenue operations processes. But explaining how all those things work is a job that's too big for little old me. So we actually have a little bit of backup today from some of my friends at Retool. We have Adam, Devin, and John from our RevOps organization who are going to go around the horn with a series of demos and kind of show you a few things that they've built to streamline revenue operations using Retool. After we go through and do some of those demos, we'll also have plenty of time for Q&A at the end, where if you have some questions for our presenters or want to dive deeper about anything that you heard during the presentations, you'll have an opportunity to do that at the end. Also, rest assured, because I know this question is going to come up, the recording of this webinar is going to be available and shared with everybody who registered. So if you need to duck out in the middle or you miss something, you can definitely catch the recording. So all of those things will be available to you. So make sure that you check that email that you used to sign up for this event. So actually, maybe before we dive in, it might be useful if maybe some of you are hearing about Retool for the first time, or maybe you're early on in your journey with Retool. I wanted to just give a quick overview of what Retool is to kind of set the context. So Retool is a platform for building custom software applications, kind of soup to nuts. So when you might consider doing a software project in React or Ruby on Rails or your favorite web framework, you can actually replace that entire stack with Retool to very rapidly create business software using our visual editor, our workflow editor, our mobile application development tools, and also like an integrated database. All those pieces come together as a part of the Retool platform to let you build web applications and mobile applications about 10 times faster than you could using traditional software development tools. And we're actually about to see some of that in action as we dig into some of our demos in the revenue operations side of the world. And kind of the first member of our panel who I'm going to introduce to share a little more about what he's built is Adam Louie. And Adam, why don't you maybe start off by introducing yourself a little bit, telling us about what it is you do at Retool, and we can go from there.
Hey, Kevin. Hey, everyone. My name is Adam. I'm the Revenue Operations Manager here at Retool. I've actually have about almost a decade now of RevOps experience, and I was actually one of the earliest Retool customers at my last company. We started using Retool to build admin panels for backend tooling. And that actually quickly evolved, though, given my experience, to actually using Retool for a lot of our go-to-market applications, such as a sales funnel, a dashboard that I actually did a lightning demo on a few years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Adam is definitely one of the OG Retool power users that we managed to trick into actually joining us here at Retool. So very excited to dig into what you've built. And what you have built is pretty sweet. It's a tool for doing sales forecasting that we actually use pretty frequently, right?
Correct. Yes, and I'll share my screen right now and give you a quick tour through our demo app. So one of the challenges we are facing with forecasting is really just aggregating the data and storing the data in a place where we could retrieve it and actually have just a better way of submitting our forecast calls as a team. We were previously, this process previously lived on sheets, which, as you know, gets quite cumbersome over time, doesn't scale well, and a lot of data gets overwritten, and there's a lot of room for human error. So what we did was we actually imported this, and I'm going to impersonate just rep. We imported this into a process that automatically pulls in opportunity data into this window here, and it's already organized by ops that are set to close during our current quarter. Reps can configure their calls or their commits and omit deals from the table here. And on the next screen, this will actually tally up exactly how much is currently won against how much they've actually called in for the given quarter. And they can write notes into this table. It will tell them if they already submitted it, and if it's already submitted, they can actually edit their call so it doesn't create duplicates in the system. And this all writes back to Salesforce. And that's one of the things I've always liked about Retool is the not only read functionality, but also the write functionality, which can be really powerful. The other thing I want to do is kind of aggregate everything into a single app. So I actually have a lot of analytics here as well, and a lot of manager tools that we can leverage. For instance, this is really simple, but if we're missing forecast calls from reps in a given week, instead of me messaging everyone individually, we can actually send Slack notifications directly from the application. We also aggregated everything to a dashboard. So as you know, Salesforce has a limit of like 20 components on a single dashboard, and I wanted to display as much information as possible, especially by team. So I basically aggregated all of our goals and team tracking in a single panel as well. The other thing I have is actually what we use for our pipeline meetings, which is just a very easy way of displaying, again, as much data as possible in a single frame that we use during forecast calls to go in, identify certain information that's missing on MEDPIC fields, kind of gamify it a little bit, and enable reps to actually make quick edits to records that could be out of date or need to be updated as they come across it when we're reviewing opportunities. So for instance, if someone's missing the M in MEDPIC, it actually highlights in bright red for managers and for the team to correct as soon as possible. And I also created some alerts that allows people to also make these very quick edits on a whim. So this has proven to be very helpful in saving time and taking a lot of the manual work out of Revit's plate week over week.
Nice. So this is pretty wild. Just the sort of level of detail that's in this dashboard. How much JavaScript did you have to write to put this together? Like, how do you kind of consider your JavaScript skills?
JavaScript, actually, I'm not very technical to begin with. So I know SQL and SOQL, which is the Salesforce SQL language. So I actually haven't used a lot of JavaScript in this. I've used very, very simple functions, a little bit of Lodash, pulling from the Lodash library. But a lot of this can be done without any knowledge of JavaScript and actually just pulling SQL queries or SOQL queries.
Nice. And you spoke to this a little bit too, but it's theoretically possible probably to do some of this in Salesforce. You mentioned, Retool being helpful because you can write back to Salesforce in addition to being able to pull data out. And there's also maybe some limitations around how many widgets you can include on a dashboard and things like that. Are there some other things that kind of made you lean towards building out like a lot of your customization in Retool versus in Salesforce directly?
Yeah, so one of these is presentation. A lot of reps, Salesforce is a great resource, but it's very rigid in terms of its customizable features and like UI. And one of the things I really like about this is we sometimes cover renewals, which has different information that's pertinent to whoever's looking at this. So for instance, MEDPIC is not as pertinent to renewals, but when you select on renewals, it dynamically updates with like product usage. And that's pulling in from data sources that live outside of Salesforce as well. So you have a lot of flexibility in terms of what you can display for the end user.
Sweet. And just because I think this might be interesting to dig into a little bit, this like a version of this process was actually in a spreadsheet at one point, right? Like, weren't you just running like a crazy spreadsheet that kind of did a slice of this? What was the situation before?
So week over week, we actually pulled in all the opportunity data into a spreadsheet. So that had to be manually like updated week over week. And reps would reference the information that was that of the opportunities that they owned on the spreadsheet and made the total calculations and added notes based on that information. And that information is not dynamic either. So once it's pulled in, it's not going to update if something has changed. A couple hours after it was initially pulled in to the forecast.
Sounds like it was running like a steel trap from a data integrity standpoint.
Yeah.
Certainly no issues there, I'm sure.
Of course not.
No, certainly not. Well, no, this is incredible. So this is definitely one major way that we're using Retool internally, and I think like this application alone, we probably saves multiple hours per week for each of the people that uses it, right?
Yeah, reps have claimed that it saves them about 1 to 2 hours each week per rep, and also saves the managers a ton of time as well, because all the calculations are tallied up by team. And there's actually a manager version of this app, so they can view their own team metrics specifically.
Yeah, fantastic. And we had a question come in from Max in the chat, just asking about if you can create a simple CRUD interface for people outside the organization to tie data back to one's, sort of backend. And that's definitely true. There's a few ways you can go about doing that. There's a way to embed Retool applications within, public-facing software that you're building. There's also, a few different ways to approach actually exposing Retool applications to the public, and you can kind of do that in a few different ways and keep your, sort of private queries private and your public queries, available to that audience. High-level answer is yes, and then the longer answer is there's probably a few different ways to approach that architecturally that we can drop some docs links in for you to explore that further. All right, so Adam, that's awesome, and don't go too far. We are actually going to keep you around to ask some questions at the end of the presentation. But thank you very much for showing us that. That was awesome.
Of course.
Awesome, very cool. And that means that Devin, the time has come for you to introduce yourself to the crew and tell us a little bit about what you do at Retool and what you're going to show us today.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Devin. I'm a sales lead here at Retool, and today I'm going to show two apps. So we have one that our SDR team uses to manage our inbound lead flow, learn more about our customers, etc. And then the second one is used more for managers and folks on our finance team and our leadership team to get a sense for how our top of funnel is doing. And so between two apps, we're going to take a look at some metrics. We're going to take a look at some interactivity and hopefully show some cool stuff along the way.
All right, let's do it. Let's see what you got.
Awesome. So let me pull this up here. So to kick it off, we'll start with the inbound dashboard. Hopefully you can see my screen here. For context, this is all dummy data, so nothing real going on in here. But basically what folks on our inbound SDR team are able to do is they hop in and they see a list of all of their MQLs in a given day. And across these MQLs, you could imagine it's populated with the real information about who this signup is, what their email is, what account they belong to, etc. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of enrichment tools out there that can automate a lot of this, but a lot of them are wrong, and a lot of them don't get the right data that we would end up needing. And so what the team is able to do is use this dashboard to jump to different places like LinkedIn, for example. They can search for the LinkedIn company. They can search for the individual's LinkedIn. We can jump to a few of our other tools. So if we want to learn more about support conversations we've had or how we're actually going to do our cadence engagement with the person, we can do that. We can view their website, and then we can write all of this information back to Salesforce directly from a single panel. And before having this, the team basically would have 4 or 5, maybe 6 tabs open at any given time. They'd be working through Salesforce reports. And even just the fact of clicking into one Salesforce contact, having the page load, go in there, go to LinkedIn, go to the website, do all of that, each lead would take somewhere around 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the depth of enrichment we needed to do. Versus with this dashboard, all the information is available just from a single table. You can click row to row. You don't have to wait for a full page reload. And then all of the links are just pre-populated so that you can quickly jump to the page you need. So this is the first panel on this app. And then secondly, we have this meetings panel here where we're able to actually write notes, log those to Salesforce, and gather some information about the conversations we're having over a meeting. And what this is helpful for is not just for the inbound team to keep up to date with all the calls they're having, what the conversations are like, et cetera. But it also keeps the entire account team informed on what is going to happen in a given meeting, what's the context, where are we getting on this call, and where should the call go. And what that does is when we're talking to a customer, it makes sure that we don't have redundant discovery. We don't have to bore them with questions that are irrelevant to what their use case is. And we can really just get going quickly as soon as we get on the first conversation with them. So this is app number 1. I'll go ahead and stop for a second and hop over to app number 2.
Yeah. And one of the things I thought, like while you're transitioning, one of the bits that I think is cool about the application that Devin built is there's fields that we're gathering and like sort of information that we're, collecting in a very specific structure. Like Retool has, value drivers that we talk about with prospects where we, want to talk about Retool in a specific way. And we're able to kind of build out specific fields that kind of help shape the workflow around like how our sales reps work, which I think is pretty neat.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a large reason why we would do something like this in Retool versus Salesforce, because it just really gives us the flexibility and the customizability to give folks on our team exactly what they need here, versus having to sort of shoehorn into an existing solution. And these updates can happen on the fly. We have a team today that all hops in, is able to create new branches and sort of update things as they need. So it's quite useful for the team. But getting into app number 2, so the first app we showed, it had a lot of interactivity. We're reading a lot of information in, we're transforming it, we're writing back to different data sources. But this app cuts a lot of that off, and it's really just read only. And so what we're able to see here is on one side, all the meetings that we booked in a given week. And again, this is all demo data, just for example. And what we're able to do is use this to see how are our individual reps performing on a given month. Is there someone who is going above and beyond that we should be looking at and saying, okay, how are they doing this? Or is there somebody who maybe is lagging behind and we should be supporting a little bit more, making sure that they can get up to speed? And then separately, seeing how we break down by segment. So across all the different segments that we work with, where is our business coming from at the top of the funnel? And then what this does is allows our other go-to-market teams to then basically transport this in to see how are we going to do throughout the funnel at the later stages. So we have our meetings over here, and we do some quick calculations to say how many of these meetings happened in the past or today or in the future. And then over here, we have our qualified opportunities. So out of these meetings that we had, how many of these actually converted into an opportunity that our sales team is going to work? And then down here on the fly, we have this chart that we can quickly adjust with a variety of different fields, and we can look at completely different ranges depending on what we need. So for example, we can hop back and we can expand this out to maybe the last year. And if it's a little bit easier to see, we can move it to something like a line chart. We can maybe flip this to be by month if we want to aggregate it at a little bit more high level. And you can sort of just scale this up and down as you need. And so if I'm in a one-on-one with someone on my team, I can hop in and see how they've been performing historically. If we're trying to understand how we're performing in a given segment, we can look at that. If we just want to know how the last 2 weeks went, we can look at that. And so all of these things are readily available all in one place. And again, what this eliminates is the need to have tab after tab after tab open to chase all these things down. Lastly, it sort of gives us some on-the-fly calculations. So as somebody who's leading a team, I really want to understand how much time do we have left in the month? How are we pacing to our goals? How does this compare to prior months? And you'll see those calculations happening all throughout, where we can see things like, are we tracking to goal? What is our progress against goal? How far through the month are we? We can see that by business days or full days if we want. And then we can also go in and break it down by individual performance as well. So if I want to see what does our current in-play pipeline look like? How do individuals, how are they performing? Where are opportunities coming from? And if I click into these, I can then see it filtered down for each of these different tables just for that specific person. And so again, it gives us that granularity all in one place without having to sort of hop around all different data sources. So those are my 2 apps.
Sweet. Very cool. So same question for you, Devin, that I asked Adam too. Like, what's your level of like JavaScript comfort? Like how much JavaScript did you have to write to get these applications together?
Yeah, this is one of the exciting bits about Retool, and hearing someone like Adam talk, first off, challenging to follow up Adam. And also I think you're quite a bit more technical than you let on. But you can be somebody who has next to no JavaScript experience, and you can get really far with Retool and really never need to use JavaScript. But for someone like me, I came from a web development background, have my degree in computer science. And so I know quite a bit about JavaScript, and it gives me that flexibility to sort of crack open the hood where I want to. And so if there's something that I want to customize a specific way, if there's a calculation that in my mind works a little bit easier to do in JavaScript versus SQL, I can do that. And so in these apps, they have quite a bit of JavaScript, but I would say that's more preference than need. That's something that I just did because it was easier for me to do it that way.
Yeah, and another similar question. So like it's possible to build this kind of tooling sort of, at least on some level, like in a BI tool, like a Looker or something like that. Have you tried similar tools like that to create experiences like this before? And maybe how does that compare to using Retool?
Yeah, so I've definitely poked around with a variety of different BI tools. And I think the thing that I just always personally get frustrated with is the feeling of being shoehorned or put in a box and told this is the very specific way you need to do this, and having to sort of work within those bounds, because as everyone here knows, businesses just don't work that way. Each business has its own unique set of fields and unique set of processes. And we could shoehorn into something like a BI tool and we'd have a much worse experience, and we'd probably not get the same insights that we do today. And so even though today we really don't go out and say, Retool is a BI tool, you can still use it for processes like this when you want to get that flexibility and customize to bring in different views or do certain calculations quickly.
Yeah, for sure. And then just to bring in a question from the chat. So they ask if you're using Retool, is it necessary to have like a basic understanding of SQL? And the answer to that is like, maybe, though not really. It kind of depends on where your data lives. So if you're trying to access a SQL database directly and do queries against it, it is helpful to be able to write some SQL to pull some data out that way. But you might be working with APIs or other data sources that you interact with in a different way. So SQL is one way to interact with your data sources, but not the only one. One other thing that's nice is there's like a visual SQL editor in Retool that kind of helps you write some of the more complex queries, like for inserts and updates and things like that, which is helpful for me. I'm more of a web developer, and most of my data access stuff that I do is usually through some layer of abstraction, like a object relational mapper or something along those lines. So it's kind of nice to have that GUI helper when I have to actually, drop down and write SQL. So it is helpful to know some SQL, though not strictly necessary, depending on the data source. Yeah, like a spreadsheet. So as a follow-up question, Alvar also asked, like, could you work with data in a spreadsheet? And for sure, you can. There's a native Google Sheets integration where you can work with data in that format as well. All right, so let's keep the demo train rolling. That was awesome, Devin. Thank you very much. And once again, I will insist that you stay put so you can answer more questions at the end. But now we're going to throw it over to John. John, how are you doing this morning?
Doing all right. How are you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing okay. And you have something pretty sweet to show us here as well. So I would love for you to introduce yourself, maybe tell folks a little bit about what you do at Retool, and then you can dive right in and let us know what we're going to see in a demo today.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So my name is Jonathan Krangel. I have the great privilege of leading the revenue operations team here at Retool. Adam and Devin are both on the team, as well as, we support all of the go-to-market functions here. And a big part of what we do runs through Retool. You've seen a few of the examples here so far. And I've got a few of what I would consider to be, kind of different examples, actually, than some of the more kind of rep-facing ones that we just looked at. So let me dig in. Let's see. Let me pull this up. All right, so the very first example is one that will be familiar to anybody who is really, really focused on data quality. So we manage a pretty sizable stack. We've got about 30 SaaS tools that all integrate with each other, and most of them integrate with Salesforce. Our Salesforce instance is the hub. It's the center of our universe. It stores all of our data. And one common theme that you've probably seen through these apps is they actually are layers often on top of other applications. So things like Salesforce interacting with that data. And it's critical, therefore, to make sure that the data that's in Salesforce is high quality, timely, and structured in the right way. So what we have are a series of 400 or so declarations or tests that run in our analytics infrastructure that run against our Salesforce data primarily to make sure that cross-object relationships are tracked appropriately, that revenue is tracked across various objects, and basically to just make sure that the data is clean and matches the declarations for our business. And you might ask yourself, well, wait a minute, why don't you just implement validation rules in Salesforce? And we have a few of those. But one of the reasons why this is super important is it kind of gives us this 30,000-foot view of the entire go-to-market data apparatus to make sure that we understand things are moving correctly without stopping the show for our reps who are in seat. So you'll see a few examples right up on the screen of things like I'm analyzing the opportunity object over here. The data obviously has been obscured, but you would see generally the name of a variety of opportunities. And as an example, I've got an error being thrown because we have a one deal that is not marked as signed in our CPQ solution. So this is actually talking to two completely separate products and then rendering an error that we have to address or not in order to keep these two things in sync. It's organized like a task list. That's what these little checkboxes are all for. So that as myself or other members of the team see what's going on, we can say, you know what, actually, yeah, we're waiting for something to resolve itself in the CPQ solution, so we're going to wait on that. Or, you know what, we took care of this, check, writes back to a custom object, lets us know that we addressed this problem, and we can move on. Similarly, this sort of infrastructure and the workflow around it, which is what Retool really facilitates, allows us to do what has long been considered maybe a really risky practice, which is a lot of development in production directly. Because we now know that if we develop in production our workflows and our backend, which allows us to move really fast, we now have this friend sitting on the sidelines every 4 hours watching to make sure that we don't break something, and can help us revert those changes and identify when we need to do that. So it means fewer, kind of sandboxes and change sets and all of these other things, which is a huge agility advantage for us.
Yeah. So this problem space, I think, I've heard it referred to as like data observability, essentially like ensuring that the integrity of the data sources that your business depends on is up to snuff. Have you ever experienced what it's like when like that isn't the case and like you have a data outage in a situation? Yeah, I would love to hear like an anecdote of like when data observability would have saved your bacon, like in a past instance.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one really resonates when I was a junior analyst in consulting, working with a large financial services company that you all would recognize. And I was working on modeling some general ledger entries, and I accidentally pushed the wrong one into the system, and we didn't notice until 8 hours later, and a major publicly traded company had to delay its financial close by 24 hours due to my handiwork. That was a problem. So
nice. That's a good one.
Sort of thing that if we had this sort of data observability inside of the system, we would have known that this happened early. We wouldn't have caught it after the closed train had kind of left the station. But you're 100% right, Kevin. Data observability is something that a lot of companies are kind of starting to explore right now. And it follows the trend that Salesforce generally and other tools have followed in this low code space, which is actually letting people develop a little bit more tip of the spear, right? Like getting closer to production data and closer to production workflows.
Yeah, 100%. And, we were actually chatting before we jumped on the webinar, I think it was last week, about how you use Retool to solve both like big important problems like this one, but also like little ones. I don't know if we'll have time to actually see it, but would love to hear about some of like the little problems that you solved with Retool as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the little problems that we solved is, the one I'm just about to pull up on the screen here. Basically, every month, I have to go and I have to review our deals. So I have to look through everything that we closed and certify that it was accurate and compliant with our bookings policies and everything. It's mostly a last mile check to make sure that, we are compliant with our revenue recognition requirements and everything. And this is a me thing, right? I do this personally. It's a use case of one person, and I use it once a month. And I used to use a variety of reports and PDFs and looking at everything together, but it made it very hard for me to compare the contract to disparate data across a series of objects in here. And this is a thing I made for myself. And basically it's a queue, and I go through all the deals. And as I flip through them, the details change. And then when I'm ready, after I pull up the PDF and compare it, I click approve, it logs it, it locks the opportunity record so changes can't be made, and we move forward. This is a great example of the sort of thing where if I wrote up a ticket in my prior life and asked for engineering help to build some sort of tool for this, it would have gotten prioritized maybe in 2045, right? Like nobody cares about solving this problem, but I do. So the fact that I could spend, a few hours in an afternoon and kind of build something and put it together for myself, and then use it right in production is actually super powerful. And we have any number of examples of these, what I would consider to be kind of small in size use cases that can just save folks hours of productivity throughout the organization.
Yeah, that's actually, I think, one of the cooler bits, like I'm relatively new to Retool. I started up in September of last year. And one thing I found myself doing is because like building an app in Retool is about as hard as like assembling a keynote presentation. Like once you kind of get the hang of how things work, that like I can just apply software to every small problem that exists in my life. Like from like, work things like our team like manages Retool's documentation. And we built a simple tool that manages images in the documentation and stores them in a CDN. But I also built an application that like does organization for my kiddo Grace is on a softball team, and we manage a lot of like their softball team's data, like through a little Retool application I built. So for a lot of the folks that are like kind of operators, and I imagine there are many on the webinar who are in that space, even if you're not necessarily a JavaScript developer and wouldn't be able to fire up, a Next.js application to build this type of thing, Retool kind of puts that arrow in your quiver, which is pretty sweet.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So with that, I think that kind of concludes our prepared demos. We can certainly dive in deeper into any of the demos that you just saw, but we wanted to reserve some time at the end to really dig into any of the questions that you had for our panel. So I'm going to head into the Q&A and also kind of scroll through the chat a little bit and just kind of go through the questions we have and make sure we get to those. So we have a question in the Q&A about, are there plans for a Kanban component for process-based workflows? And we'll see. Maybe the panel knows differently. I'm not aware of sort of like a high-level specific Kanban component that's under development, but it's possible to model those types of workflows. And this is something I've done actually, where Retool has a container component, which if you've used a tool like Trello before, like looks conveniently like one of those like sort of lists of cards that exists on a Trello board. And even though Retool doesn't natively support drag and drop, it's actually pretty easy to kind of move items between dynamic lists that exist in those containers. So if you were to go try to build something like that, that would be the place where I'd direct you, is to use containers to kind of represent different workflow steps. And then you could use either a table or in Retool, there's something called a list view, which is a way to create like repeating elements based on a data set, and kind of combining those components together. I suspect you could get pretty far building a Kanban style workflow. All right, so we have a question about how many Retool apps do you currently have at Retool, and how do you solve the people finding the apps when they need them? Good question. I think I would estimate the number of Retool apps that we have at 1.2 bajillion at this point. But like that's a question I'd actually throw out to the panel. Even like maybe within the sales group, are there some ways and some hacks that you've found for like helping discoverability of the apps that you create?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick this off. There's a few ways that we do it and that I've also seen other companies do it. So one way is we have this concept of modules, and modules are basically a bunch of components that can be used all throughout different Retool apps. So you bundle a bunch of components together. You can then use that bundle in different apps. And so one way is folks will create sort of these navigation bars, and it's universal and it's across all their apps. And those navigation bars can have drop downs, they can have search, etc. And so you can sort of go through and link to a bunch of different Retool apps. So that's one common way. But one way that we've solved for this internally, just knowing how many Retool apps we have, is we actually have one app that shows the top used apps by not just usage, but also edits and saves, etc. And that's also a good place for folks to sort of get together, look at the apps that are being used by everyone, and go from there. But at the end of the day, nothing quite beats just asking around and saying, does somebody have an app for that, and getting a link dropped in Slack.
Indeed. And feel free to jump in with other hacks there if folks have one, as I peel the next question off here. So question here, this is actually a good one, which is kind of an architecture question about how do you handle teams using multiple tools? So from experience, do you tend to centralize everything within Retool, or does the approach change based on the team? And kind of curious to see like what y'all have seen out in the field for how folks approach this.
Yes, I can take that one. So here at Retool, we have a very, very strong bias towards strong data governance. And what I mean by that is making sure that the data in Salesforce is our primary kind of platform for that sort of thing. Making sure that the data that folks interact with, they have the ability to interact with it in the Salesforce UI, but also using something like Retool in a kind of equitable way and in a way that is not destructive. So I'll give you an example. We have apps right now that allow our sales engineering team to interact with data in the system, or our sales team to interact with that data, but we don't allow them to create new opportunity records, as an example, or delete. We allow them to update and only update the sorts of fields that would make sense for kind of the general day-to-day workflow. Anything related to revenue, that is tightly controlled. So basically what we do is we create this separation, and that allows for creativity. So, a sales engineer can go and build an app to fit their workflow and share it with the rest of the team, but without creating kind of the chaos that comes from everybody updating everything all the time, right? Especially when it comes to the metrics that drive our operating performance or payments to people or things along those lines. I think if you combine that with some of the practices that Devin was talking about around banners at the top that let people see what is a blessed, approved application by the central teams, you can get pretty far.
Awesome. And that's actually a good segue into another good question that I see in the list here, which is, how does the team manage security, like access to Salesforce queries that Retool makes? Are there any kind of techniques or best practices we could share? And I imagine that y'all have used, platform features of Retool that allow you to create, security groups that can access Stratford queries. Would love to hear how you've used some of those features of Retool.
Sure, I can kick this one off. So when connecting a Salesforce resource, you can set it so it authenticates as a single user or requires authentication from the logged in user. So for something like the Sales Forecast app, we actually require authentication at the rep level. And any edits to Salesforce, any view permissions, it's all governed by the Salesforce permissions on the back end. What I've also done is also any fields that are being edited or visible to a rep, I control that through the queries that are being pushed through Retool as well. John, did you want to add anything to some of the other apps you've seen in the system?
No, it's exactly right. And I think it's a combination of all of these things. It's like, what do you show to people and allow them to interact with? What are the permissions that are enabled? And sometimes that can be a little tough because the workflow that you need to drive in the application results in 3 or 4 fields that you don't want the person editing, but results in changes to those fields. So you have to have a very specific kind of permissions mindset to enable those changes to occur without kind of blocking the others.
Right. And so Retool as a platform has like a role-based access control system where you can kind of set up queries such that they can only be executed by logged in Retool users that have been assigned a specific role. Do we use that feature in the RevOps world somewhere? Like, is there a set of roles that we've configured that kind of manages those things?
Yeah, we definitely do. So a lot of the apps that you saw before are tied to resources where we use role-based access control within Retool. There's another use case, and one that I think is particularly exciting to me and to others from a data discoverability perspective, which is building a Retool app in order to pull metadata out of Salesforce that allows you to see field definitions and how formulas are constructed and things like that. In practice, you need pretty broad administrative credentials to do that in Salesforce, which we don't want to give to everybody. But what we can do is we can gate use of an administrative resource in Retool so that it can be used only within the context of this app and only for these specific purposes.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely lots to explore with that specific feature, but possible to get pretty creative with how you set up the roles and like access to different resources and queries like in the world of Retool. So let's hit that. That's kind of the questions in the Q&A. Let me head to the chat and see if there's any I can clean up in here as I scroll up. Let's see. Max asked a question a little bit ago about, looking at data sources, can you combine multiple data sources through multiple APIs, e.g. Airtable, SQL, Google Sheets, and output them in one dashboard or even one database? And the reason being, regional branches might store similar information within different databases, but essentially the databases represent similar metrics was the question. And I imagine that I'll maybe answer at a high level, but I imagine our panel here actually has some very specific examples they could share, which is, so Retool, like you can do like queries against lots of different data sources that you have connected to Retool. And then a common pattern within a Retool application is to create something called a transformer, which can actually take the results of multiple queries and kind of smush that data together into a more reasonable set that you can then use as like one consistent like array of list items, say, that you would display in a table. So you can do some amount of like transformation of that data on the client side. And I imagine that's something we do with some regularity with the data sources we saw in the demos. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll chime in here just because I am the least technical of the group. And one of the things that I really appreciate, being somebody without the skills that Adam and Devin have, is the special query anything with SQL resource that we have. So I have very limited skills, and one of them is the ability to write SQL. But this allows me to literally take data from all kinds of places, APIs, whatever, and then I can use a thing I understand to stitch all of that stuff together into data that I can then interact with. So in a way, it allows SQL within the context of Retool to be this like great democratization, right? It's like it's a tool that I can use to interact with a lot of things. Same thing with JavaScript. If that's the primary arrow in your quiver, you can use transformers like Kevin was saying more directly.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also a huge fan of the query JSON with SQL. I know Adam is also a huge fan of that as well. And I think, again, that's a great example of multiple ways to solve the same problem, depending on what your skill sets are. I tend to opt more for using a lot of transformers when I need to combine different data sources. And then you also have the ability to sort of choose, is this a process that a bunch of things need to run in parallel? So for example, do all these queries need to run at the same time? Or can I daisy chain things? And Retool gives you these really convenient on success or on failure handlers. And so I can say, if this query succeeds, now I'm going to go and call the read query again, which pulls the data back. Maybe I can make it more complex if need be, or less complex. And then in failure states, instead of just spitting out an ugly error to all of our users and have them see that, you can then maybe create an alert where it has a notification and says, hey, sorry, we hit an error, here's who to contact, things like that. So when it comes to running multiple things at the same time or bringing multiple data sources into the same place, Retool is really data agnostic and doesn't really care where your data is coming from. You can sort of just mush it together however you need.
Yeah, for sure. Like in addition to kind of the transformers and the work that John and Devin were just talking about is all happening client side in your Retool application. But actually with the advent of workflows, which is a recently released Retool product where you can kind of visually create sort of back-end recurring tasks. Another thing you can do is if there's a particularly computationally intense or time-intensive like set of queries you need to do in serial or maybe parallelize, you can actually create a workflow for doing that. And we actually just released the ability to return JSON data from a workflow, like in response to a webhook. So it does require a little bit more code, a little bit more setup than doing it on the client side. But if you find yourself like needing to do a lot of like really intense like data transformation, the workflows product is a great way where you can do that on the server, where you have a little bit more compute and it's not quite as slow as it happening in memory, on the client side with your end users trying to do it in JavaScript. Let's see. I'm going to go into the. It looks like we have another one in the Q&A. So, does Retool pay for any additional sales tools on top of Salesforce, or do you decide to build everything internally? That's a good question. What's the current state of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do. We have tons of tools built in Retool, and we also have tons of off-the-shelf SaaS tools. And I think the kind of question behind the question there is one I get all the time, which is, okay, well, why don't you go build that in Retool? And the answer is that we really could build anything. Variable comp is kind of my favorite example to pick on, right? We could build a variable comp calculator and administrator thing to calculate commissions in Retool. But the real question is, like, why would we? Because we want variable comp to work every time. We do not want it to be a thing that we focus overly, on, other than to make sure that it works. And there are a bunch of companies out there, the Captivate IQs of the world, the Exactlys, the Spiffs of the world, whose sole purpose in life is to do this really, really well and accurately. And I am happy to pay them some money to do that, right? I don't want to think about that use case as deeply as many of the other things. All the things that you've seen and where we believe that we should be building are things that either are proprietary to us, so like our sales forecasting process that Adam showed, or the MQL management process. That's like an us thing. That's really, really core to what we do, and we want the agility to be able to build the exact artisanal thing that we want. Anything else, we really, we don't want to have to pay the tax of building, maintaining, and updating, right? Even though we could. So at the end of the day, it kind of always comes down to a pretty simple build versus buy equation. What changes things is that the cost to build and maintain with Retool is probably 1/10 what it normally would be without it. Even still, variable comp wouldn't achieve that hurdle for us, as an example.
Yeah, 100%. It's really like those custom operations that every business has, where Retool really tends to shine.
Right.
All right. So we are, folks, at about 45 minutes, and we want to let you get back to your days. I know it's early for folks on the West Coast, and kind of lunchtime for folks elsewhere in the US. So we'll probably go ahead and cut it off here. Once again, I'm going to remind folks that the recording of this session is going to be available. We'll send it out via email to everybody who registered. And I cannot let you go, though, without one more plug, which is for another virtual event that's actually coming up in a few days. So in a couple weeks, on the 29th, I believe it's Wednesday, the 29th, I think is the exact day. We'll throw a link in the chat, so you won't have to rely on my random guesses. But Retool Developer Day is kind of a roll-up of all of the different features that have launched in Retool over the last 3 to 6 months. Retool ships on a pretty rapid basis. There's always something new coming out in the product. Chances are excellent that you have missed at least 1 or 2 pretty awesome ships from Retool. So if you want to join us for Developer Day, you can learn about everything that we've been up to. And we'll also have like kind of the world premiere of a few fun new features that are coming out in Retool too. So if you are a Retool user, you want to see what's new, Developer Day is definitely not an event you're going to want to miss. So definitely register there. From our teammate Jake just dropped in the link out to the Developer Day event. So make sure you head out there and register. All right. And with that, I'm going to, call it a day. Thank you so much to Adam, Devin, John for joining us today and sharing your expertise in the RevOps space. A wide range of experiences, but all of them able to build very cool stuff in Retool. So thanks a ton, guys. I really appreciate you hanging out today.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. And thanks everybody for hanging out. We'll talk to you real soon.